She looked me in the eye and told me I'd never be more than a loser. 2 years later, she was signing CEO contracts under my name, while the man who whispered in her ear was sleeping on park benches. But back then, I didn't see it coming. I still believed her smile meant something, that her touch wasn't already cold. I still thought the man shaking my hand at dinner wasn't the same one leaning into her ear when my back was turned. Funny how love blinds you. Funny how betrayal sharpens your sight. I remember the sting of her words the night she finally spat them out. You gamble with your life, with our future. You'll never be anything more than a degenerate. And I remember the silence after, the kind that seeps into your bones and tells you a part of you just died. What she didn't know was that silence grew teeth. It gnawed at me, pushed me, reshaped me. By the time I was done, she wore the crown I gave her, and he had nothing left but regret. When I first met her, I thought she was the answer to everything I'd been searching for. She was light where I was shadow, calm where I was chaos. I didn't have much then, just a handful of half-formed dreams and too many nights spent chasing opportunities that seemed invisible to everyone else. But when she smiled at me, it felt like maybe, just maybe, someone finally believed I wasn't crazy. Of course, that didn't last. I've never been the 9-to-5 type. I can't sit behind a desk waiting for someone else to decide if I deserve a raise. My life has always been about risks, cryptic investments, buying into startups nobody had heard of, late-night deals made over coffee and glowing laptop screens. To me, it wasn't recklessness. It was building a future. To her, it looked like gambling. Why can't you just get a normal job like everyone else? She asked me one night. We were eating takeout on the floor of our apartment, cartons spread out between us because we couldn't afford a dining table yet. I smiled, even though her words stung. Because I'm building something bigger for us. She shook her head, chewing slowly, her eyes dropping to the noodles she was twirling. Bigger, smaller, it doesn't matter if it never shows up. I laughed it off, but inside, her doubt pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Still, there were good moments, tender, quiet things that I thought would hold us together forever. Nights when we'd stay up until dawn, watching movies with the volume low so the neighbors wouldn't complain. Times when we'd share one cheap bottle of wine and talk about what our kids might look like, how we'd decorate the house we swore we'd buy someday. She liked navy blue walls. I wanted something brighter. We promised to compromise. I made sacrifices for her. More than she ever knew. Friends called me out for skipping nights out, for missing poker games or bar crawls, but I couldn't waste money like that. Every dollar went into our life, her rent, her school loans, little surprises I'd leave on her pillow. Even when I picked up the dirtiest jobs, loading trucks overnight, washing dishes until my fingers blistered, I handed her every bit of it, telling her it was for us. And she would smile, kiss my cheek, whisper, "Thank you," like she meant it. Those were the moments that blinded me. I thought the laughter we shared over greasy fries at midnight meant we were unbreakable. I thought her head on my chest, the way she hummed softly before falling asleep, was proof that she saw me, the real me, not the hustler, not the dreamer, but the man who loved her enough to bleed for her future. She wanted stability. I wanted vision. I thought love was enough to bridge that gap. I was wrong. The first signs were small. So small I almost convinced myself I imagined them. Her phone used to sit face up on the counter, buzzing with harmless group chats and social media pings. Then one day, it started showing up face down. Screen locked. Silent. She'd laugh at messages I wasn't part of, thumb flying across the glass as if her entire world was in that little device. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's glued to their phone these days, right? But then she started disappearing into the bedroom to take calls. Calls that always seemed to end with her voice lower, her tone softer, like she was sharing a secret that wasn't meant for me. And then came the clothes. She used to throw on jeans and an oversized sweatshirt when we went out, never caring much about appearances unless it was a special occasion. But suddenly, Her wardrobe changed. Sleek dresses, pressed blouses, expensive heels she swore were on clearance. Her makeup routine stretched from 5 minutes to 30. She even bought perfume I'd never smelled on her before, sharp, floral, intoxicating. Big meeting? I joked one morning as she adjusted her hair for the 3rd time before heading out. She shot me a look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said quickly, raising my hands. You just look nice, that's all. She didn't smile. The warmth I used to find in her eyes was cooling into something else, impatience, maybe even resentment. Little things I did started bothering her. The way I left my shoes by the door. How I hummed while working late at my laptop. She snapped at me over dishes, over bills, over things that never mattered before. I told myself it was stressful. Everyone gets tired. Everyone gets snappy. But then I met him. His name was Adrian. Polished suit, polished smile, polished words. The kind of man who carried himself like the world was a stage built just for him. He drove a glossy black car that purred like money and wore watches that could have paid our rent for 6 months. We met at a dinner one of her colleagues hosted. She had insisted we go, even though I wasn't much for those gatherings. This is Adrian, she said, her hand brushing his arm a little longer than necessary. We've been working on a project together. He shook my hand with a grip just firm enough to make a point. So you're the dreamer, he said with a smirk, his eyes scanning me like I was a resume that didn't quite qualify. I frowned. Dreamer? That's what she calls you, he chuckled, sipping his wine. Big ideas, risky moves, always chasing the next big thing. Admirable, really. But it's dangerous too. The way he said it wasn't admiration. It was dismissal dressed in charm. Throughout the evening, I watched the way he leaned close to her, the way she laughed at his jokes a little too brightly, her hand brushing his sleeve when she thought I wasn't looking. My chest tightened, but I swallowed it down, telling myself I was imagining things. Still, his words stuck with me. Reckless. Dreamer. Dangerous. After that night, she compared us more openly. Adrian just got promoted, she said casually one afternoon, scrolling through her phone. He's only 35 and already managing an entire division. That's great for him, I muttered, not looking up from my laptop. He's stable. Reliable. Not like, she stopped herself, but the words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Not like me. I started noticing other things. Whispers between them at gatherings. Her quick, nervous laugh when his hand brushed hers. The way her phone lit up with his name at midnight, and she'd slip out of bed, whispering into the darkness while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. One night, I couldn't help it. I followed her. She stepped into the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear, pacing quietly. I know, but he tries so hard. I can't just, her voice dropped lower. Security, yes. Respect. That's what I need. My stomach turned to stone. She was talking to him. About me. About what I wasn't. When she came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. Her body was warm against mine, but I'd never felt colder. That was the beginning of the end. She thought I didn't notice, the secret of smiles, the way her face lit up at his name, the disdain that grew in her eyes when she looked at me. She thought she was subtle, but love sharpens your senses in strange ways. And in those quiet moments, watching her slip further and further away, I realized something terrifying. The woman I had sacrificed for, the woman I'd built my life around, was already halfway gone. And the man she was running toward wasn't just my rival. He was the kind of enemy who knew exactly where to sink the knife. The night I learned the truth wasn't cinematic. No thunderstorm, no broken glass, no dramatic fight. Just a quiet Thursday evening where the universe decided to split me in half. She had left her laptop open on the coffee table. Normally, She was careful, closing tabs, locking her phone, hiding her tracks. But that night, maybe she was tired, or maybe she thought I was too blind to notice anymore. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I just sat down to clear some space, and there it was. An email thread. Her name. His name. Words that felt like knives dragging across my skin. He'll never change, Adrian. I've begged him to get a normal job, to grow up, but he just keeps chasing nonsense. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a degenerate who's gambling with my life. My chest caved in. The word stared back at me, degenerate. The same word she'd thrown at me in the heat of an argument, but seeing it written, shared with him, made it permanent. Adrian replied, smooth and cutting. You deserve better. You deserve a real man, a real future. You can't keep wasting your years hoping he'll turn into something he's not. I can give you security, respect. Stability. You know I would. I scrolled. Messages stacked one after another. Her doubts. His reassurances. Her sighs turned into confessions. His charm turned into promises. Then I saw it. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like, if I chose you instead. And his reply, almost smug in its certainty. Then wonder no more. Attached was a blurry photo. Them at a cafe. Her hand on his. Her smile, the same one I once thought belonged only to me, shining brighter than it had in months. That was the first time I felt my soul physically ache. Not heartbreak the way movies show it, but something heavier, slower, like the earth itself was pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the screen until the words blurred. When she came home later, humming softly, carrying takeout like nothing was wrong, I almost asked her. Almost screamed, almost begged. But the words caught in my throat, strangled by something colder than rage. I watched her move around the kitchen. The way she smiled absently at her phone before slipping it back into her pocket. The way her shoulders relaxed, like she'd left the weight of me somewhere else. And I realized, she wasn't mine anymore. Not really. The days that followed were torture. She grew bolder, almost careless. Comparing me to him openly now, as though daring me to argue. Adrian's team just closed $1 million deal, she said one night, pushing her food around her plate. It must feel good to have that kind of stability. I swallowed hard. Good for him. Good for him, she repeated, her voice sharp. Do you even hear yourself? Always content to clap for other people, never building anything real yourself. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth would crack. She didn't see the hours I spent clawing at opportunities. She didn't see the bloodshot eyes, the risk, the quiet sacrifices. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care anymore. Adrian's presence grew like a shadow in our home. His name slipped into conversations where it didn't belong. Adrian says this. Adrian thinks that. He was everywhere, even when he wasn't. I started hearing them, half conversations on the phone, her voice low but sharp. Of course I care for him, she whispered once, pacing the hallway. But I can't live like this forever. No, you're right. I do deserve more. Her silence after that said everything. Another night, I saw them. Not with my eyes, but through a reflection in a window when I came to pick her up from work. She was standing too close to him in the parking lot. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. She smiled. Maybe it wasn't a kiss. Maybe it wasn't even physical, yet. But betrayal doesn't always need lips to destroy you. Sometimes it's in the glances, the whispered promises, the decision to let someone else in where you used to belong. The heartbreak was relentless. I'd lie awake, listening to her breathe beside me, wondering how many of those breaths she wished she was taking next to him instead. I'd replay every moment we'd ever shared, dissecting them, questioning which were real and which were lies. She grew colder. Conversations became interrogations. My every idea, my every plan was met with a roll of her eyes or a sigh of disappointment. "You're wasting your time," she snapped once, slamming the fridge door. "Why can't you just admit you'll never be enough?" The words echoed long after she left the room. Meanwhile, Adrian tightened his grip. Smooth poison dripped from his tongue into her ear. Promises of safety, of admiration, of a future free from the burden of me. He painted himself as the knight in shining armor, and me as the fool still covered in dirt. And she believed him. I saw it in the way she looked at me now, not with love, not even with anger, but with something worse. Pity. That was the night I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Because pity is worse than hate. And pity is the last thing I would ever let them leave me with. Pain is a combustible thing. It burns. It lights up whatever you feed it. For me it didn't scorch into madness so much as it refined the fuel. The heartbreak became a furnace. The anger became a map. I stopped asking how to get her back. I started asking how to make her regret thinking she'd ever had the right to call me worthless. First, I built silence. I stopped telling her where I was. I stopped answering when she called in the middle of the night. I kept my face neutral, practiced small talk, let pity settle on me like dust. People like my wife don't look twice at a man consoled by a bowl of microwave dinner and 2 hours on a streaming show. They look past him. That invisibility became my cover. The reality of what I already had surprised me. A handful of side gigs here. Small stakes won there. A name on a patent nobody had read. Friends who owed favors. Nothing flashy, yet. Enough rope to swing a plan. I started cleaning up the threads I'd tangled over the years and knotting them together into something heavier. It began with spreadsheets. Cold, ugly tables where emotion had no place. Numbers felt honest. They didn't mock me the way people did. I mapped every income stream, every debt, every lost opportunity. I listed possibilities the way you list tools before building a house, angel investor connections I'd fallen out with, a startup founder I'd helped in a kitchen at 2 a.m., the quiet contractor who'd loaned me his van once. I wrote contacts down. Names that would mean nothing to the people around my wife but everything to someone who knew how to use them. "Are you actually doing anything useful?" she asked one Friday, leaning against the doorway in her work blouse, the one she'd bought the week she stopped laughing with me. Her tone was light, the contempt was surgical. "Yeah," I said. "I'm working." She snorted. "On what, exactly?" "Fantasy castles." She meant to hurt. She succeeded. I worked harder. I stopped spending where I wanted to. I doubled down where it mattered. A small emergency fund became a war chest. I learned to listen like an accountant, listening for needs, for weak spots in businesses around me, for when people had money but not the patience to grow it. I became a collector of opportunities. There were legitimate gambles. A tech idea I believed in. A food truck with a cult following. A slice of property outside the city that developers ignored because it didn't look pretty. I pitched, I begged, I leveraged. I used my credit in ways I'd only ever whispered about. I slept with documents under my pillow. I showed up at 8 a.m. and left at 2 a.m. I learned to be patient with cash flow the way some people learn to be patient with love. Silence served me twice. The world assumed I was still the same man she mocked. That assumption freed me. People underestimate the quiet man. They think he has nothing. They don't watch him. I watched. I started pulling discreet strings. Small wins first. A contractor who owed me a favor helped me flip a condemned lot for a profit. A former roommate, now an app developer, gave me a reduced rate for equity. The founder I'd once helped booked me a seat at a funding table. I let every little victory compound. It wasn't elegant. It was tedious as hell. Nights with no sleep. Bankers who raised their eyebrows. A deal that required me to teach myself entire industries overnight. I read legal clauses until my eyes blurred. I learned to say no when it was smarter, and yes when I knew the consequences I could survive. I became the kind of person who thought in leverage. There were setbacks I didn't tell her about, because the plan depended on her not seeing me as dangerous. A partnership that dissolved when the other party stole an idea. An investor who withdrew at the last minute after an opportunistic lawyer smeared our pilot as risky. My first small company nearly folded when a supplier double-billed. I felt panic. I felt despair. But panic became a lesson. Despair became a ledger entry, name it, solve it, move on. At one point I almost lost everything. A bank called about overdrafts. A punitive fee threatened to sink a promising contract. I sat on the kitchen floor, ironic, because that floor had once been the stage of our cheap dinners, and I thought about walking away. About leaving with my dignity in a box. About the relief of disappearing. Then I remembered the smugness in her eyes. The way she'd put the word degenerate in an email as if I were a curiosity she'd outgrown. I pictured Adrian's watch catching the sun like a blade. I stood up. I bargained with myself. 50% more grit. 10% more risk. A fallback plan that would let me reroute if the main line snapped. I called in favors. I accepted that some alliances would be transactional, cold, professional. I became comfortable with friction. Conversation became strategy sessions. I shadowed men who spoke money like prayer. I listened to podcasts I would once have scoffed at. I learned to network without making it obvious. A late-night bar became the place where I met a man with a shipping contract. A charity gala put me next to a private equity analyst. I learned to be charming while keeping my mind on math. All the while, she nursed her conviction that I was still the same. She complained about the dishes. She told friends I was too rough around the edges. She described me to others with words that cut like filleting knives. That angered me in a way I can't explain. Not because she talked, people talk, but because she refused to see change. She refused to be surprised. I recruited loyalty in quiet ways. A barista I once helped when business was slow now kept an eye on small leads. An old friend let me buy him out on favorable terms because he owed me more than money. I found people who wanted to climb and had no problem doing the climbing for a man with a plan. Nothing romantic. Just alignment. Sometimes I tested myself with cruelty. I'd go to the places where she shone, with suits, with polished smiles, and I'd feign the content, almost meek. Other times I let the facade drop and I'd work in the shadows until a single asset was ready to surface. I matured into the art of timing. The coldness crept in slowly. It wasn't a transformation overnight. It was a series of bets that won more than they lost. A small seed fund that finally hit with a hungry app. A property sale with a surprising buyer. A consulting gig that paid more than a year's wages. Each victory tasted less like joy than like validation. Each win felt like a scale falling into place. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked one evening when I came home with new shoes and a phone call that had set a deal in motion. She spotted the smiles from my contacts and narrowed her eyes. "Why keep me in the dark?" I said nothing. There was no answer that wouldn't spoil the future I was building. "You're hiding," she said at last. "Hiding because you're ashamed." If her pity had weight, it would have crushed me. I let the pity settle. I let it fertilize the plan. The thought formed, unbidden and clean, "If she thinks I'm worthless, I'll make her choke on my success." That sentence became my mantra. I rewrote it into tactics. Make the company she adores mine to place her at the top. Quietly buy the controlling shares. Build a brand she craves. Demolish his credibility legally and publicly, but in ways that look like market corrections, not malice. Make everyone think fate did it, not me. Let her be the face. Let her sign with trembling hands under my letterhead. Make her gratitude feel like a confession. Ambition is a hungry thing. It asks for sacrifice. I gave it time, patience, and the small cruelties of hiding. I gave it secrecy. I gave it rehearsals, mock pitches in front of a mirror. I gave rehearsed answers for when people asked what I did, for real. I perfected the innocent shrug. There were moral compromises. There were nights I lay awake thinking about consequences, thinking about the human cost of what I planned. Sometimes anger cooled into a strange sadness. Once, in a late-night call with a sympathetic investor who'd grown up poor, I caught myself almost confessing why this was personal. I didn't. I learned how to be ruthless without being reckless. That distinction saved me more than once. Betrayal has taught me patience. Patience taught me leverage. Leverage taught me to strike where it mattered. I didn't need to ruin them with one thunderclap. I needed to make their world reconfigure around the truth I'd built, that I was not degenerate. That I had been the architect all along. When deals were signed, I signed them through layers, LLCs, silent partners, trusted friends, so my name didn't flash in headlines before the moment I chose. Every step was double-checked. Every legal clause is read. I became methodical. My old life, the jokes, the missed laundromat appointments, the thrift store shirts, was a costume I wore to lull them into complacency. The setbacks never stopped. A competitor undercut a launch. A supply chain hiccup delayed product. A bank changed loan terms overnight. I fixed, adapted, and rebudgeted. I learned to be nimble. I learned to swallow pride and ask for help. I learned to lie with a face that showed no shame. And somewhere in the middle of all that, between the legal paperwork and the sleepless calculations, my heart went quiet. Love, as I'd known it, died in the same place she did, quietly, without theatrics. It was replaced by purpose. Purpose is colder, but it's stronger in a way that doesn't ask. It demands. I started writing the end in my head. Not the violent end. The tidy kind, recognition, reversal, poetic justice. I would not break them with cruelty. I would outmaneuver them with the economy. I would let the market do the righteous indignation. I would let her sit in the high office and stare at the irony. One night, alone with 3 glowing screens, I whispered to myself what I'd never say aloud. If she thinks I'm worthless, she will choke on my success. Then I smiled. The plan was no longer a fantasy. It was a beast I had fed enough to wake. They always imagine the reveal like fireworks, big boardroom, roaring crowd, champagne sprayed in slow motion. My reveal was quieter. Cleaner. More efficient. Like a surgeon's incision that takes out the tumor without spilling blood. I picked a Tuesday. Mid-morning. A day when the city was busy and people were distracted. I wanted the world to be doing what the world usually does, ignoring small alarms while a large one detonated. The first call went to the press. Not the tabloids, those would have made it petty. I called a financial reporter known for respectability, the kind of person whose byline still carried weight. I sent him a package, dates, transfers, LLCs, emails, the paper trail of every silent partner, every shell company, every side gig that had quietly become an empire. I rehearsed the language to sound neutral and factual. No melodrama. Just numbers. Just proof. Then came the board emails. A consolidated packet to the right inboxes, the CEO at Adrian's firm, the compliance officer, a handful of investors who still believed the polished image more than the ledgers. The packet showed how Adrian's empire, his promotions, his million-dollar deals, were structurally dependent on a credit line extended by a firm I controlled through a chain of benign-looking entities. It showed preferential contracts, backdated guarantees, and a cascade of small misrepresentations that, stitched together, became fraud. I didn't forge anything. I didn't need to. I had built the ledger honestly. I had arranged the timing so the pattern looked intentional. And I had saved conversations, voicemails, emails, where Adrian promised returns he couldn't deliver. At 11, an internal investigation was announced at his firm. By 1 in the afternoon, the compliance officer had called a halt to his projects. By 4, his promotion was frozen. By 6, the press had begun to circle. I watched the whirlpool start from the outside through a window I paid for, silently, legally. There was a delicious, clinical pleasure in seeing systems react the way I knew they would. Men like Adrian depended on momentum and optics. Remove both and they sink. But I didn't aim to drown him in public shaming. That would have been messy. I aimed to strip him of the things he'd built his life around, power, money, reputation, in a way that left no single villain to point at. I let the market do the condemning. Next, the company I'd incubated quietly for 18 months stepped into the light. It wasn't enormous. Not at first. It was a tidy, well-run tech services firm with solid contracts, a proprietary algorithm that made operations cheaper, and a product the market needed. I'd seeded it with money from a property flip, a consulting gig, and tiny stakes from people who trusted me. Then I let it grow, slow, steady, unspectacular, until it had a rhythm. I arranged a strategic partnership between that firm and the conglomerate her colleagues admired. A press release was scheduled. A contract signing was drafted. But the signature block at the bottom had a different name than anyone expected, my holding company. She walked into the room the morning of the announcement smiling, hair done, heels crisp. She was nervous, which made her look radiant. She had no idea what she'd be signing. Of course she didn't. We sat across from each other at the polished table. Her hands were slightly damp. Her lipstick left a ghost on the napkin when she sipped her water. Adrian sat beside her, confident as ever, his hand on the contract like it belonged there. He'd told her this was a career fireworks moment. He'd told her he was the architect of their future together. "Everyone ready?" the moderator asked. Cameras flashed. The reporter I'd sent the packet to smiled with the calm of someone who already knew the shape of the story. She did not know. When the legal counsel slid the contract toward her, the name in the header made her pause. She frowned. "Wait, this is, under," her fingers hesitated over the dotted line. The counsel looked at me, and then at her. "There were some restructuring moves," he said smoothly. "A new holding partner is taking controlling interest. They've requested she be placed as CEO of the new entity. It's part of the agreement." Her eyes darted to me. Nothing in them but confusion. Then the slow, dawning horror of recognition. This was yours." "All along," she stammered. Her voice was small, betrayed. I felt nothing like triumph. Triumph is loud. What I felt was the exact coldness I had cultivated for months, calm, precise, implacable. I had planned this so she would not just be elevated but implicated. I wanted her to understand the scale of my work by wearing it. I wanted her to sit in the room where she had judged me and sign the paper that made her dependent on what she had scorned. "You told them she was the right person for the job," Adrian said, trying to sound casual, to reclaim command over a moment now slipping like wet sand through his fingers. "It makes sense." "It makes sense now," she whispered. Her hands were shaking. I handed her a pen. She looked at it as if it were a live thing. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones edged closer. The faces around us blurred into a tide. She was small in that room. The CEO the world expected gleamed on the press release in glossy font, but the real truth lived under a layer of legalese where I had placed it. She signed. Her signature was tentative. Her name looked like someone testing a language. Then Adrian attempted to smile, to mask the beginning of the collapse. He'd expected applause. Instead, the first email hit his phone, an internal memo from compliance. Then another. Then a call with his CFO that lasted exactly 3 minutes. His face went stone. He stood up like a man whose legs had been removed. In that movement, I saw him flicker. That night, news outlets had pieces framed one way: prominent executive under investigation. Others pointed out that the partner in the new deal had opaque ownership. The right kind of legal scrutiny began to circle. Investors asked questions. Lenders huddled. I didn't stop there. The humiliation had to be strategic, not merely theatrical. Adrian had shells, 2 small loans, vanity projects, a line of credit secured against speculative assets. I'd already positioned a trustee to call in those notes if certain covenants failed. I nudged the right people, quietly, by email, by trusted intermediaries, so that audits happened. Sometimes fate needs a push, sometimes the market needs a nudge. Within weeks, his recent projects were frozen. A high-profile client terminated a contract amid the fog of investigation. Payments stopped. The debts piled up. Creditors moved with the cruel efficiency of wolves. He sold what he thought he could sell. He defaulted on mortgages. Pictures of him exiting his building with 2 bags, suitcases that no longer matched the car he once drove, made their way to the feeds. A man who took pride in a glossy image found that image cracked and leaking. At the edge of my satisfaction was the image I had stalked months earlier, him, sleeping on park benches. I never forced that end. It came from the system I'd timed to his downfall and the decisions he made as the world tilted. He had nowhere to go when his credit evaporated, when his name no longer opened doors. There are few things crueler than watching a man who once lived by projection fall into a life where there's nothing left to project. As for her, my wife, she sat in a new office that overlooked the city. The plaque on the door bore her name in polished metal. Inside, a young assistant arranged flowers she could never afford if she were paying the bills herself. Board members sent congratulatory notes with subtext. Investors offered cold smiles. She came to me in the evening and the ink had hardly dried. The building hummed. She looked like a woman who'd been set down on a stage she didn't build. I don't understand, she said. How did you? It wasn't a trick, I said. My voice was small, flat. It was a plan. You could have told me, she said, the plea showing for 1 second before pride masked it. We could have. You judged me, I interrupted. You called me a degenerate man who had nothing to do with our finances. You shared my worst parts like a curiosity. I could have told you. But I wanted you to see the difference between what you assumed and what I actually built. Her eyes filled. It was not the tearful guilt I might once have softened, it was the helplessness of someone who realized her pedestal was a mirage. Why put me in charge, she asked, bewildered. I let the silence work. She needed the knowledge to be complete and the power to be meaningless. You wanted respect, I said finally. You wanted stability. I gave you both. But you gave me something else first. I searched for the word and found none kinder than the truth. You gave me contempt. She flinched. You can't, she stopped. Pride kept talking. You can't just use me. You already used me, I said. When you decided I was worthless, you used me to make yourself feel smarter. She rose then, the motion clumsy with shame. So this is revenge. This isn't revenge, I corrected. Revenge makes people hurt. This is justice. I built value. I shifted reality. You now wear the face she thought she wanted. But that face sits on a company that answers to me. Every signature, every decision you make is underpinned by structures I control. You are powerful, yes. Powerful within a frame I designed. She laughed then, a cracked, hollow sound. You're proud of this? I'm satisfied, I said. That's different. She wanted tears, apologies, to be held. I offered none. I had forged a new language that didn't contain comfort for someone who had chosen him. Weeks later, when the last of Adrian's creditors froze his final accounts and a charity, a cause he'd once used for photo ops, publicly rescinded a promised donation because of reputational risk, I watched his face on the news. He had aged 10 years in 10 days. He walked with a cane in one clip where he'd once strolled with swagger. The camera caught him looking directly at her in her office with her name on the door, and for a second his eyes begged for what I had given her, recognition. Instead he got legal motions. He got cold filings. He got the system. She called me once more that night. No pleading now. No demands. Just a small, ragged admission. You were always smarter than I thought, she said. You just hid it to punish me. I hid it because you taught me how to hide, I replied. She is CEO now. She signs contracts under my structure. She gets the praise and the scrutiny. She calls me sometimes, not for comfort, but for counsel. I answer when it suits me. I will correct a board decision here. I advise a hiring move there. I keep her afloat like a benefactor who enjoys watching a puppet try not to notice the strings. Sometimes, late, I see her in the windows of the building, backlit and small. She looks at the skyline and sometimes she touches the glass like she remembers a time when we stood there together. I used to want her hand. Now I want something quieter, her understanding. She will always be trapped between gratitude and shame. Gratitude because life improved by every measurable metric. Shame because she built that life on the ruins of what she called a degenerate. As for me, I have no appetite for vengeance anymore. That was a phase. There is something colder, more durable, power exercised with the serenity of inevitability. I make choices. I move money. I shift fortunes. I have built a kingdom of contracts and quiet ownership. I sign deals in names she recognizes and not my own. On a shelf in my study sits an old takeout container, our first cheap meal on the floor. I keep it as a reminder. Once I loved her because I thought she loved me. Now I keep her because she is a proof of what I became when someone else named me less than I was. The city breathes. Neon leaks into the night. Outside, a man who once scoffed at me sleeps under a bridge. Inside, a woman who once called me a degenerate opens a folder and signs my papers with a steady hand. I watch her do it. She looks up at me, eyes raw, searching for the man who once begged her not to leave. I am not that man. I am the architect who taught her how fragile certainty can be. The city doesn't forget. It just shifts its spotlight. I walk past the tower at dusk sometimes, letting the glow of my own name etched in steel wash over me like a silent anthem. People look up, point, whisper. They wonder who I am, but they never see me for what I was. They only see the shadow of what I've become. Inside, she sits behind glass walls, wearing the title she once begged another man to hand her. CEO. A crown forged from the very foundation she once called a waste of time. She signs contracts with her perfect penmanship, smiling for cameras, holding meetings where my decisions echo through her words. But her eyes tell a different story. Eyes that flicker with the knowledge that every ounce of her power is on loan from me. That she is a queen in a castle I built, on land I own, with soldiers who answer to my orders. She used to sigh at me over styrofoam noodles, telling me to get a real job. Now her entire existence is tied to the job I never stopped doing. That irony is sweeter than any "I told you so." And Adrian, my rival, her savior, the polished man with the shiny car, he doesn't walk these streets with his chest out anymore. I saw him once, hunched on a bench outside the tower. His suit was gone, traded for layers of threadbare coats. His shoes were worn through the soles. He held a paper cup in his hands like it was the last fragile thing keeping him alive. Nobody looked at him. Nobody whispered his name. The same lips that once praised his confidence now spit his name like ash. He glanced up as I passed. Recognition flared in his hollow eyes. For a second, I saw the ghost of his arrogance, the man who called me a dreamer, who mocked my risk, who whispered poison into my wife's ear. But the ghost flickered, and all that remained was the beggar. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat. His downfall didn't need my words. The silence between us was enough. The world thinks revenge is fire, burning, loud, destructive. But the real revenge is frost. Slow. Creeping. I froze them both in place until their futures crystallized exactly as I designed them. One trapped in power she doesn't own. The other trapped in failure he can't escape. And me? I walk on. I don't need her love. I don't need his downfall. I only need the truth that plays on repeat in my mind every time I watch her sign, every time I step over him in the street. She thought I was a degenerate. He thought I was a fool. Now she signs every paper under my name. And he begs for change outside the tower that bears mine.